All right. So if you guys are listening or hopping on, please feel free to raise your hand or drop a question in the chat if you join in on this live feed. My name is Rachel Mangold. I'm the current graduate assistant of Wellbeing and Fitness here at Ohio University. I also have my bachelor's degree and I'm a certified personal trainer, health coach, and nutrition coach as well. And I'll provide some of my contact information towards the end. So today's presentation is going to be over macros versus micros, so macronutrients and micronutrients, talking about what they are, what the different subtypes are of macros and micros, what we should be looking for in our diet. I'm not going to give any specific prescriptions or protocols or specific dietary guidelines in terms of how much or how little you should be consuming of these different macros and micros. So for any more specific information, please consult your doctor or a certified dietitian. Basically, today's presentation is just informational to provide you with some guidance on what is typically consumed in a diet, maybe what you should look for, and where to look for it. All right, so starting off with macronutrients. So macronutrients are the subunits of overall calories and are essential for carrying out different physiological functions. So traditionally, there are three main macronutrients. These are going to be carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Sometimes fiber and alcohol are counted separately, but alcohol is a non-essential, and fiber is typically included within carbohydrates. And because alcohol is kind of difficult to measure and gauge calorie content, especially if you're following a macronutrient protocol, that will just be allotted to usually carbohydrates or fats. And like I said, fiber is typically included within carbohydrates. Each macronutrient is worth a certain number of calories, more specifically kcals, per gram of that macronutrient. So for carbohydrates and proteins, it's going to be 4 kcals per gram, and for fat, it's going to be 9 kcals per gram. So fat definitely has a higher caloric content per gram compared to proteins and carbohydrates. All right, so breaking these down just a little bit further, we're going to start off with carbohydrates. So some examples of these are going to be rice, potatoes, fruit, vegetables, sugar, cereal, bread, oatmeal. Carbohydrates are essential as an energy source. However, they can be classified as non-essential because the body actually has the capability of converting amino acid structures into glycogen, which is what carbohydrates are broken down into, which is why people can still function while doing keto. And keto essentially is a high protein, moderate to high fat, moderate to high protein, and low to zero, really, carbohydrates. So that's why people can still thrive and function on carbohydrates. However, carbohydrates do support performance, energy, and cognitive functioning. So if you are in the gym and you are working out, especially at pretty high intensities, moderate to high intensities, you want to be consuming carbohydrates. Also, if you ever just cut them out completely, you may notice some brain fog, headaches, things like that. That's typically going to be because your blood sugar will reduce pretty dramatically at the beginning. But like I said, eventually your body will hopefully kick into ketosis. That's a whole nother presentation. I'm getting off on a rant here. But for our purposes today, carbohydrates are essential. And just a little note here on fiber. Eating carbohydrates high in dietary fiber is also beneficial for digestion and heart health. So things like fruit, vegetables, oatmeal, some fortified cereals, those are going to have a higher fiber content. This is really important for our digestion. Typically, it's recommended 25 to 30 grams of fiber. And again, that is included within carbohydrates, most likely if you're tracking. So into protein, so just like carbohydrates, 4 kcals per gram. These are an essential macronutrient. You have to be consuming protein for growth, for recovery, bone health, and hormonal functioning. So some examples of proteins, any kind of meat. So chicken, turkey, beef, pork, and usually animal byproducts, so Greek yogurt, most dairy products, whey, eggs, and then some non-meat alternatives, so tofu, tempeh, seitan, or seitan, and some other things that you may not find in grocery stores in the meat substitute area are typically higher in protein. So there are 20 amino acids that comprise proteins, 8 of which are essential. So by essential, they can only be consumed through your diet. So your body cannot make them itself. You have to get it within your diet. And so that's why it's really important, especially if you are vegetarian or vegan, to make sure that you are still getting those amino acids either through supplementation or other methods. All right. And so the good thing about protein is that it is the most satiating macronutrient. So it's going to make you feel fuller for longer compared to carbohydrates or fat. And the digestion of protein shows the most thermogenic activity. So there's more calories, more expenditure to digest protein as opposed to carbohydrates or fat. Leucine is one of the amino acids that we were talking about. Leucine is the most important amino acid for muscle recovery and muscle protein synthesis. So if you're ever looking at protein powder, protein bars, any type of whey supplement, you'll want to check and make sure that it has leucine in it. And a lot of times it'll have it on the packaging that it does. Getting into fats. So like I said, higher calorie content. So fat oxidation, so the utilization of fat for energy, occurs during low intensity activity and exercise, or typically low intensity endurance exercise. So fat intake is essential for hormonal and cognitive functioning. I know fats usually get a really bad rep. A lot of people say, I'm trying to cut back on my fat, low fat diet, no fat diet. However, fat is really, really important. It's essential for hormonal and cognitive functioning. Like I said, it also stores our fat soluble vitamins. So a lot of times, if we're not getting enough fat in our diet, we're likely going to be deficient in some of our fat soluble vitamins, which we'll actually talk about a little bit later. So, kind of like I was saying, fat is not equivalent to unhealthy. We need fats to survive. Especially getting fats from omega-6 and omega-3 sources. A lot of times you'll find those in fish. And limiting our saturated and trans fat, that's going to help with cholesterol. And omega-6 and omega-3s are really important for eye and brain health as well. Some examples of fats, avocado, nuts, olive oils, excuse me. Red meats will have a higher fat content. Just be careful about the levels of unsaturated versus saturated fats. Fish and flax seeds are great options for fats. Okay, so switching gears here a little bit, let's talk about what micronutrients are. So micronutrients are vitamins and minerals that are considered essential for metabolic functioning, growth, energy regulation, and a plethora of other important mechanisms. So vitamins can be fat soluble or water soluble. So fat soluble, that's going to be vitamins A, D, E, and K. So they're carried in fat and stored in fat tissue. So kind of like I was saying before, if you are depleted in both body fat and fat intake, you may have some deficiencies in these vitamins. Then there are water-soluble vitamins. That's going to be all your B vitamins and vitamin C. And essentially with these, if you have an excess of any of these vitamins, that's all going to be excreted through your urine. So starting off with the vitamins before we get into minerals. And it looks like someone just jumped in. Welcome. If you have any questions at any time, feel free to drop a question in the chat or just use the hand raising feature. So getting into vitamins here, we're going to talk about the role and function of each vitamin and some food sources where you can find them. So starting off with vitamin A. Vitamin A is going to be really essential for vision, any mucous membranes throughout the body, skin, and body tissues. And the best source for vitamin A is going to be animal food sources. Getting into B vitamins, so there are a handful of different B vitamins. We're not going to get into the specifics of those in this presentation today, but overall, B vitamins are essential for metabolism of micronutrients. So what we were talking about before, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. It's going to be essential for the functioning of your nervous system and for. So because there's a few different kinds of B vitamins, the sources are going to vary. You'll find throughout this presentation, a lot of fortified cereals have vitamins in it. And so for B vitamins, that's going to be a source. Oranges, nuts, seeds, animal foods, so animal meat and byproducts, eggs, and seafood. Getting into vitamin C, so especially with COVID and everything, a lot of people have been focusing on intake of vitamin C, and that is because it is an antioxidant. It also helps with cell development and healing, and it's also really important for iron availability. So if you have an iron deficiency, but you're also not utilizing vitamin C, maybe you're deficient in vitamin C, even if you're taking an iron supplement, you may not have iron available for your cells because of your deficiency in vitamin C. So some sources of this: broccoli, citrus fruits, tomatoes, onions, and potatoes are kind of the big ones. Vitamin D, this is going to be really important for calcium absorption. So similar to kind of the relationship between iron and vitamin C, if you're low in calcium and you're, increasing your calcium intake, but you're still deficient in vitamin D, you may not be able to absorb and utilize that extra supplementation of calcium. Vitamin D is also really important for building bone mass and preventing bone loss. So some sources of this: fish, egg yolks, fortified milk, and cereals. Those are food sources. One of the best sources is sunlight as well. So making sure that you are getting some sunlight is a great source of vitamin D outside of food. Next up, we're going to talk about vitamin E. So just like vitamin C, this is an antioxidant. It's also important for immune function and metabolism. So also during COVID and in getting into cold and flu season, making sure that we're getting enough vitamin C and vitamin E, as well as zinc, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So vitamin E, like I talked about, good for immune function and metabolism. You can get this through oils, nuts, and peanut butter. And then vitamin K, this is going to be really important for blood clotting, tissue, and bone health. So a lot of times you'll see sometimes vitamin D and vitamin K combined in a vitamin supplement. And some sources of this are going to be dark leafy greens like kale, and then other things like broccoli and asparagus. Are there any questions or comments before we get into minerals? Alrighty. So talking about minerals, so there are more than these four that I have listed, but these are kind of the main four that I wanted to talk about today. So starting off with calcium. Calcium is going to be really important for muscle contraction, nerve transmission, as well as bone health. So some similar sources are going to be dairy products. A lot of times fruit drinks are going to be fortified with calcium, so there'll be calcium added into the drinks. Cabbage and kale, those are all also really good sources of calcium. Magnesium. So a large percentage of the U.S. population is pretty deficient in magnesium, but this is important for activation of enzymes for nerve and muscle functioning, as well as energy regulation. So especially if you're someone who is active, who's working out, if you're feeling really tired, maybe more stressed, you could have a deficiency in magnesium. Again, I'm not going to get into any sort of diagnosis or personal recommendations for what to take or how much, but it could be something to look into. Sources of magnesium are going to be bran. Again, most cereals are going to be fortified with minerals, nuts, and soybeans. Next up, we're going to talk about iron. So iron, something that we're probably all pretty familiar with. This is important for red blood cell production and functioning. So a lot of times you'll hear iron deficiencies, maybe you're anemic. Women typically need more iron in their diet or through supplementation because of their menstrual cycle and the loss of blood. Some sources of these, again, fortified cereals, enriched breads, red meats. Just be careful and conscious of fat content there. Poultry, oysters, nuts, and beans. Finally, we're going to talk about zinc. So this is involved in digestion, metabolism, reproduction, and wound healing, which is why it's another thing that has been really popular amidst COVID and everything. And some sources of zinc are going to be oysters, beef, chicken, and beans. All right. So most of this presentation was pretty informational and straightforward, but here are some just main takeaways and considerations. So there are national recommendations based on biological sex, age, and activity levels, which is why I didn't really want to include national recommendations just because they vary so much depending on your demographics, including like where you live can have a big influence. While carbohydrates aren't necessarily essential, like I talked about earlier, they do benefit and support us in a big way. And so I don't like to recommend taking out any type of macronutrient, even though your body can get glycogen from other methods, simply because it is beneficial for our energy pathways. When making decisions about our nutrition, we need to consider the macronutrient breakdown as well as the nutrient quality of the foods we choose to consume. So yes, being mindful of how many carbs, proteins, and fats we're intaking, but also making sure that the quality of those foods are still at the highest level we can have within our budget. Typically, fresh is better than frozen, and frozen is better than canned. The less preservatives are typically better in terms of quality, because as food is processed, a lot of times the nutrient quality will decline. Those vitamins and minerals, the concentration of those will decrease. And I talked a little bit about supplementation. There are a ton of supplements and vitamins you can take to support your vitamin and mineral needs and intake. Just make sure you're consulting with your doctor or a certified dietitian or nutritionist. And while weight loss is determined by a caloric deficit and weight gain is determined by a caloric surplus, the kinds of food we eat does matter. So even if, you're in a caloric deficit and you should be losing weight, the kinds of food that you're eating may be making that harder. So there are some high inflammatory foods. If they're processed, that's typically higher inflammatory value. So you may see more bloating, more water retention, and things like that. So the kinds of food we eat does matter. That's not to say, only eat celery and carrots and never have enjoyment with your food, but just be conscious of that. So yeah, here I've included the source that I used for some of this information, as well as my contact information. I know we only have one guest in here today, but are there any questions, comments, or concerns that I can address before we conclude this presentation? All right. If not, totally cool. Feel free to email me if you have any personal questions. But other than that, have a great rest of your day. This will be uploaded later onto the site to view afterwards. And thanks. Have a great day.